American aircraft.
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
General Cruz, are you familiar with this system?
I'm not wearing my glasses at the moment, but...
Well, I'll help you out. This is an SA-3 anti-aircraft system.
Correct.
Are you familiar with this next system?
I am.
What is it?
I'm going to have to ask you
It's
to
an
help.
SA-6.
I'm going to guess that...
This is also an advanced anti-aircraft system, is it not?
It is. It was used widely in the Balkans in the 90s, correct?
And the Houthis also have this system, don't they?
They certainly do.
And they've employed it against our aircraft, have they not?
They have attempted to, correct.
I spent my life in service to this country. I deployed 3 times to combat in service to this nation. I learned in that time in service that responsibility is core to leadership. You accept responsibility when things go wrong. You admit mistakes. You set the standard from the very top. It is completely outrageous to me that the administration officials come before us today with impunity, no acceptance of responsibility, excuse after excuse after excuse, while we send our men and women downrange to do incredibly difficult, incredibly dangerous things on our behalf. And yet, nobody is willing to come to us and say this was wrong. This was a breach of security and we won't do it again. It is outrageous and it is a leadership failure, and that's why Secretary Hegseth, who undoubtedly transmitted classified, sensitive operational information via this chain, must resign immediately. There can be no fixes, there can be no corrections until there is accountability, and I'm calling on the administration to move forward with accountability. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Good to see many of you again, and thank you for enduring 2 long days. I will note I always use fire emojis when I see terrorists getting killed. And I want to talk about cartels. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I've been investigating it thoroughly for the last couple of years, and I'm glad to see that it's mentioned in all of your opening statements. I mentioned it at the very beginning of the threat assessment. There's a lot to work on here. One of our task force, we had a cartel task force in Congress. One of our key findings was that there needs to be a centralized, maybe call it authority or maybe call it office, maybe call it cartel czar within the administration that actually coordinates all the very different aspects of fighting this battle. Has anything like that been talked about? I'll go to you, Director Gabbard.
Thank you, Congressman. It's good to see you again. This is very much central to the conversations and planning and execution of the President's focus on targeting the cartels and the threats that they pose to the American people. Homeland security task forces are being set up that include across the government integration. I can speak from my standpoint from the intelligence community, and our National Counterterrorism Center is leaning heavily forward into gathering and consolidating and integrating the intelligence that comes from DEA and others who've been working this issue for a while to make it so that it can be shared and integrated through the federal, state, and local law enforcement equities who are going after this problem.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that exact thing in closed session, but at a higher level, our recommendation is there needs to be someone at a much higher level that coordinates state, DOD, CIA, FBI, Homeland. It's a massive problem, one I'm all too familiar with. Director Patel, the FBI is tasked with working foreign corruption charges. In the past administration, the FBI told me they actually don't focus on Mexico very much. Because now, in their defense, they say the reason is because they won't get anything out of it, because they don't have a cooperative government to work with. I think a lot has changed. Do I have your commitment that we will at least start following up on those, because the judiciary system in Mexico is a key component in our failures to address the cartels.
You do, Congressman. Apologies for not getting back to you sooner.
You're good. Appreciate it. I also want to ask you that the FBI has disrupted an alarming number of terrorist attacks in the last 2 years. Great on the FBI for doing that. I don't think many Americans realize how good the FBI has been at this. But this also gets to the conversation earlier about FISA 702. One of the main arguments I wanted to argue with my colleagues on this was, when you have a warrant process for the query, what you will fail to do is connect the dots between the domestic and the international threat. And those connections are there, as we see all the time. Would you agree with that we need to maintain that process in a responsible way, of course?
I do, sir.
I appreciate that. Director Gabbard, in my remaining time, I want to ask you, because of my, and this may go to our General Cruz as well, because of my work on energy and commerce, we have an issue there with broadband spectrum auctions, and of course this affects our intelligence community in a very large way, and our DoD. Getting right to the question here, how much, if any, spectrum can the DoD give up without having a significant effect on the administration's prioritization of lethality and deterrence?
I'll defer to General Cruz, specific to DOD.
I certainly wouldn't want to speak for all of DOD, and I think the committee is already in a fantastic conversation with the DOD on that issue. But broadly, what I would say is DOD has laid out the portions of the spectrum that it believes for both operational capabilities, and in closed session, I am more than happy to walk you through from the intelligence portion of the mission that we do. There are two different portions of the spectrum. We often talk about one, but not the other, and in closed session, I'd be more than happy to tell you why the other portion of the spectrum is important to national security.
Sure, and the details are obviously classified, but we can talk about X and S spectrums and get a better idea for the public about, because the public would benefit from telecom having the ability to use some of these. When we look at 5G networks, 6G networks, so it's a conversation that we need to have and a much longer time to do so, which I've run out of. So I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Dr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I associate myself with the comments of my colleague, Congressman Crow. I'm deeply disappointed in how we're handling this breach of protocol and so forth. You know, every year at the beginning of Congress, we take an oath to office. You know, this is an awesome responsibility to be a member of Congress, to protect our country. We have no greater responsibility than to protect our homeland. And, you know, when I walk into this committee and the honor of being on this committee, I don't see Democrats and Republicans. I see folks that every day want to do the same thing. But as Congressman Crow suggested, the mark of leadership, and we all are leaders in this room, is to accept responsibility when mistakes happen. And that signal chat was a mistake. I'm not here to impugn your character. You were all nominated by the president. You were all confirmed by the president. But we have an awesome responsibility and incredible responsibility to the American people. And then given that we are the United States of America, we have a responsibility to the world. And this really was a breach of protocol. I'll take you at your word that we are going to do a full investigation of it. Our responsibility as oversight is to understand this breach, understand who leaked information, how that happened, and then hold those responsible. You know, I 100% agree with the chairman in his opening statement. He said, where trust is breached, those responsible need to be held accountable. So do I have, you know, Director Gabbard, we served together, we came into Congress together. Do I have your word, when this investigation is fully completed, we will get the full breadth of the investigation?
Thank you, Congressman. That would be my intent. I will caveat that by saying that this is being conducted by the National Security Council. I've not gotten any indication that they would try to withhold that, but I can't speak for them.
Okay. I also, you know, I see way too much politics when it comes to our national security and our national defense. We've got to keep politics out of this. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We're Americans. We're tasked with the responsibility of keeping our country safe. Director Gabbard, you have an awesome responsibility here to advise the president, to collate all the information, everything that the IC is providing, and provide that best advice and guidance to the President of the United States. We have to keep politics out of this. Even if the president disagrees with this, if it goes against his personal wishes, if he's considering an order that potentially is unconstitutional or illegal or compromises our security, I want your word that you will always provide and give that honest advice to the president, even if it will make him angry.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the question because, as you said, I do take this responsibility very seriously. And it was my commitment to the President, to the Senate, the American people, that as the Director of National Intelligence, I will ensure to provide the President and all of you as policymakers with that unbiased, relevant, and timely intelligence. And to your specific question, the answer is yes. I will inform the President of that accurate, timely, unbiased intelligence reporting, whether it is something that agrees with an assumption or a view or an objective or not. That's my responsibility to him and to the American people.
Great. I would just offer advice. In your role, what you do on your personal devices versus your official devices, you're speaking to the public, and I would just offer, as I conduct myself, what I say personally is always going to be considered Congressman Barra saying it. General Hawk, I've appreciated working with you and have a deep concern about our cyber vulnerabilities. And we will go into some of this in the closed session. But Salt Typhoon is something we take very seriously, as well as Volt Typhoon and the compromises. Can you just briefly give us an update of where we are with those two?
So, Congressman, we share your concern in terms of the overall ensuring that we can protect the critical infrastructure of the United States. The area that we have been deeply focused on is our ability to partner with industry. 99% of our critical infrastructure is controlled by our industry. So our ability to bring government information to be able to understand what threats look like and the origin of those threats, help inform how industry can defend that and also create the necessary equipment to ensure that we're secure. That partnership continues to grow, and that's really one of our key priorities. And I'll be able to go in closed session into more detail about the specific actions we've done together as an interagency with our industry teammates.
Right, thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. A gentleman from Pennsylvania, General Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance and your service to national security for our country. I'm going to start with Director Patel and then go to Director Gabbard. I'm concerned, like many Americans, about the wide-scale purchase of land, real estate, et cetera, by the Chinese Communist Party or those sanctioned by the party in America, especially those lands proximate to sensitive military sites or sensitive national security sites. Director Patel, I think we can all understand that that could lead to the ease of nefarious activities of numerous sorts. What do you think should be our posture or our policy from a national security standpoint regarding the purchases of these land and the ownership, occupation, utilization, et cetera, by the Communist Party sanctioned use?
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the question, and I'm not going to shape foreign or national policy, but from the FBI perspective, if we had federal statutes to enact criminal allegations and pursue those relating to these matters, we would do so. I agree with you that having CCP actors purchasing large swaths of land next to military installations is a national security issue, a major one, and I would highlight to the American public, we're not allowed to buy farmland in mainland China or in Russia. So I don't know why we let that happen here, but that's a personal matter for me. If I were given more legislation on it, I would love to act on it.
Thank you. Director Gabbard, I'm going to look at, keeping with the same theme, crypto mining by the sanction. Well, you can't crypto mine in China, right? It's outlawed in China. However, of course, we're supportive of crypto, I am, in the United States of America, but China's mining in America where they can't mine in China. And in particular, I'm thinking about one site where the mining was occurring close to intercontinental ballistic missiles. And CFIUS was tipped off by Microsoft. And of course, there are actions ongoing. Should the Chinese Communist Party, sanctioned individuals or interests, be allowed to crypto mine near sensitive military or national security sites in the United States of America? And if not, what should we be doing about it?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. I'm not fully aware and up to date on the specific example that you've mentioned, and I'll go and look into that and
Happy to
get back
provide.
to you further.
Right.
Absolutely. Look forward to having the conversation with you. Broadly, this is obviously a concern, that any of these activities occurring near or around any of our military sites creates that potential national security risk and the potential for foreign intelligence collection.
I'm hoping it's a priority for everybody on the dais there. It is a priority, I think, for the American people, certainly for me. I want to move on in the time remaining with a related topic, which is the hundreds of incidents by predominantly Chinese students, oftentimes called gate crashers. So this includes the two gentlemen in uniform on the dais. I'm going to kind of point to three events that happened just last year. One in Grayling, Michigan. 5 Chinese students are charged for lying and concealing evidence. One in the University of Minnesota, where a drone flew over Newport News and took pictures of classified information regarding ships and classified systems. And then one at the University of Florida regarding the illicit acquisition and shipment of toxins, biomedical drugs, and research supplies to China. In these cases, or most of these cases, we encounter these people, and then we release these people. As a matter of fact, in the case of Florida, apparently she found out that criminal charges were being prepared, and she dropped out of school, and her whereabouts remain unknown at this point. What should be our posture? Because we're trying to follow up after the fact. We're encountering these people, whether they're gate crashers or whether we catch them conducting this illicit activity. We try and prosecute. That takes a lot of man hours, as you know, Director Patel. Is this the best policy, or is there something better that we can do? I mean, the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952 gives the Secretary of State the authority to revoke visas. But should these people be allowed to come to this country in the first place is the question, and what should our posture be? Anybody?
In terms of the visa issue, I know that the administration is working on a policy, but to directly answer your question, anybody who utilizes the student visa program to come to this country to conduct criminal activity should never be allowed in this country. And anyone that's doing it here in the United States of America from an FBI standpoint will be vigorously investigated, and will use the expulsion or criminal process on them.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the witnesses. First let me say that we do have to, in this committee, try as much as possible to remain nonpartisan as opposed to bipartisan. I can recall being that way when I was counsel on the House Ethics Committee, and it's a hard position to take. But I'm really struck by the fact that in December of 2023, many people made Secretary Lloyd Austin go through the stages of the cross in self-flagellation and mea culpas for not informing the president that he was having a surgery. And now how we're treating Secretary Hedgepeth as if he is untouchable. Mike Waltz, when he was a member of Congress, went in the Committee on Armed Services to talk about and slammed Austin for holding himself to a different standard than the American people. And yet we are not doing this across the board. And that's disappointing, at the very least, very disappointing. Director Gabbard, thank you for your testimony. And one of the things that I believe I heard you say was that when there was a discussion by DOJ as to the cuts to foreign aid, that there had not been a request for an intelligence and national security or an intelligence assessment of the impact of those cuts. Was that your testimony a little earlier?
Congresswoman, I have not seen any kind of actual official assessment, either within the intelligence community or outside of it, on what the effects of those cuts to USAID programs has been.
But it was not requested by DOJ of you or of any of the areas in which you have oversight over?
I'm not aware of any
Okay,
requests.
great. Thank you. I know that there has been some open source reporting on what the effect of those cuts are. I mean, when we think about several examples, Kenya, our strongest regional ally in the Horn of Africa, and a key partner with us in the fight against terrorist group Al-Shabaab. And, you know, according to the Washington Post, that's not definitive, and we can talk about this in closed session. Some Kenyan journalists are now being trained by Beijing, mirroring the US programs that have been cut by the administration. Director Gabbard, is letting China train Kenyan journalists going to make Kenya more or less receptive to American requests of the Kenyan government, do you believe?
As you said, Congresswoman, our relationship with Kenya has been very longstanding.
So do cuts of ours to train journalists in Kenya make them more or less, and Beijing having that make them more or less receptive?
Clearly, there is strategic competition taking place. I'll withhold my personal view to look at an official
Well, I was
assessment.
asking for your director view, not your personal view. And then additionally, we have ended Voice of America, which provided accurate, unbiased news, in our opinion. Meanwhile, St. Petersburg University has announced that it's opened 11 Russian language centers across Africa that pay special attention to the promotion of traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. Director Gabbard, is Russia a friend or a foe? Are they our friend or our adversary?
They are an adversary.
Thank you. I believe that this reckless cuts make terrorism and our influence in Africa, which is on the front lines of terrorism, a real threat to us, and we need to be careful of it. Director Patel, one of the benefits of being here kind of in the middle is I get to hear other people's testimony and the questions that are asked. I know that Mr. Carson asked you questions specifically about the Counterterrorism Division. And we know that there has been some open source reporting that says that individuals within that division have been removed or been moved, not necessarily fired, but moved. Do you know if that is correct?
I don't have any personal information on that, but people within the CTD component, which is a large component of the FBI, move all the time.
And have they been moved? Are you able to get that information to us, whether they have or have not been moved?
I'll go back to my team and see who has been moved. If you have a particular interest, we'll share it with you.
Of course, we have an interest in Counterterrorism Division and movement of individuals within that. Because one of the other things I'm concerned about is you have stated, I believe in other areas, that the disbandment of certain sections of the FBI related to intel and breaking up components. Can you explain to us how you intend to do that or what you would like to do and why?
My intention is to reprioritize counterintelligence authorities and cyber capabilities to focus on violent crime and national security, and that's what I'm doing.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Missouri, Madam Ambassador, Ms. Wagner.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all of you for being here and for your continued service to our country. Director Ratcliffe, you have repeatedly stated that China is our top national security threat, and I agree. What was the biggest gap in intelligence collection toward China during the previous administration?
Good to see you, Congresswoman. I think our collection against China as a hard target in the prior administration was lacking in several areas. I would say primarily in human collection and also with regard to the processing of open source information relating to China. I think part of that relates, Congresswoman, to the policies of the prior administration about treating China as a
pacing competitor, I think was the word, as opposed to an adversary. So one of the things in my focus as CIA director, which carried over from my time as DNI, in seeing all of our intelligence, seeing that China is our greatest geopolitical threat, and focusing the CIA specifically more directly in all areas of our collection on China as a hard target.
Well, and I'm grateful to hear you say the words open source. So as I hope that all of you may be aware, I am honored to be the chair of the new Open Source Intelligence Subcommittee for HPSI. It is the first time this committee has focused specifically on an intelligence discipline, I'll say. We established this subcommittee because private companies, researchers, and most importantly, foreign adversaries, as we speak, are taking full advantage of the explosion of commercially available information. HPSI has taken a stance that OSINT, open source intelligence, should mature as a primary discipline on its own accord. Director Ratcliffe, your agency kind of produces the lion's share, I'd say, of OSINT. Do you agree, sir, that open source intelligence should mature to be a primary discipline?
Absolutely agree. So as you know well, Congresswoman, the CIA is the functional manager for OSINT, just as we are the functional manager for HUMINT across the IC. And OSINT, open source intelligence, reaches, frankly, policymakers as the most cited material in the President's daily brief as part of a long list of tailored production that we do. By a large percentage. But also, as you know, and as you've pointed out, Congressman, until recently, one of the greatest weaknesses with regard to OSINT was that the collection was so large that it was daunting for use by mission partners across the IC. So the CIA's open source enterprise pioneered the use of AI to triage that collection as it comes in. And what that allows us to do is to summarize collection from over 225 languages into English and to put that in the hands of policymakers, again, showing that the CIA is focused on using technology to tackle some of the challenges to intelligence collection.
There is so much innovation in technology in this, and the investments being made across the IC to purchase data, but it appears to be in silos, to be perfectly honest, and lacking maybe an integrated approach. I believe that that is because there, frankly, is no clear lead for OSINT in the IC. And as part of my oversight responsibilities, I plan to review the various ways in which the intelligence community buys commercially available information to determine if there is a more efficient, cost-effective approach, especially when it comes to the taxpayer's expense. Director Gabbard and then Director Ratcliffe, can you, and in my brief time, quickly share your thoughts on which agency should be the primary organization to manage OSINT and why?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership in this area. I look forward to following up with you in detail, but the Office of Director of National Intelligence is tackling exactly the problem that you've identified, that we have multiple elements across the intelligence community essentially wasting taxpayer dollars by contracting separately to get after the same collection of OSINT and commercially available intelligence. So this is something we're actively working on and look forward to working with you.
And do you agree with Director Ratcliffe that this should be a key discipline?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to make a few things clear before we move on to other questions regarding the Signal chat. Director Gabbard, yesterday before the Senate Intelligence Committee, specifically when answering Senator Kelly, you repeatedly said you did not recall any discussion in the Houthi PC small group discussing operational details, strike targets, the type of vehicles and military units involved, or the timing and order of strikes. Do you stand by your testimony from yesterday that you do not recall any of the discussions regarding this type of classified information? Yes or no?
My response in the Senate yesterday, yes, I stand by that response. Obviously, the release of the screenshots that came from that chat group today were a refresher on what happened. As I said earlier, I was not involved with that portion of the chat, so it did not come to my recollection yesterday.
Thank you. So I take that as you stand by your do not recall yesterday stance when it was you were asked those questions. You've been in office 43 days. Director Radcliffe has been in office 62 days. This was considered the first major military operation using lethal force of the Trump administration. Was this the first, this was probably the first time that you've been involved with a discussion like this on a thread. It was not discussing, you were not on a group chat discussing where we're gonna go for lunch. You're discussing putting men and women of the armed services in harm's way. That's a major decision. So, and when did that happen? 10 days ago? Okay, I'll answer that. It happened 10 days ago. Here's the point. Like something of this magnitude, it's something that you would not forget. It's something that most people, if you're taking this job so seriously, that you would not forget. I mean, since I've been on this committee, there's been days that I have woken up in the middle of the night from the things I learned in SCIF. So deciding to use military force is something hard to imagine. So the do not recall doesn't pass the smell test. It makes it, it's unbelievable that was the case. So that's what the American people don't understand. And I know a lot of folks in this administration were saying that they're going to take on the establishment and drain the swamp, but you have become that swamp in a matter of days, not weeks or months, days. So one of the things we're going to look into is what actually occurred, because the American people deserve a full accounting. Additionally, the main person who was involved in this thread that a lot of people want to talk to is Secretary of Defense Hegseth. And a lot of questions were brought up regarding his drinking habits in his confirmation hearing. To your knowledge, do you know whether Pete Hegseth had been drinking before he leaked classified information?
I don't have any knowledge of Secretary Hegseth's personal habits.
Director Radcliffe, same question. Yes or no?
You know, no, I'm going to answer that. I think that's an offensive line of questioning. The answer is no. I find it interesting that you want to. No, I'm going to answer. You asked me a question. You want an answer?
No, listen.
You don't want to focus on the good work that the CIA is doing, that the intelligence community.
Director, I reclaim my time. Director, I reclaim my time. Here, I have huge respect for the CIA, huge respect for our men and women in uniform. But this was a question that's on the top of minds of every American, right? He stood in front of a podium in Europe holding a drink. So of course, we want to know if his performance is compromised. If people were asking if the General Austin was compromised because of a heart issue,
was his performance compromised because of a successful
I yield
strike?
back. Mister, I bring my
you want to know? You want
time.
to talk about accepting responsibility? Do you think you should accept responsibility for a successful strike to make Americans safer? You want to focus on?
I reclaim my time. So here's the thing. This is serious. As somebody, we've been briefed in this committee about using Signal. One of the things they basically said, the most secure phone call, the least secure text messaging. And we know that your people, Russians, Chinese, are on your phone.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give the director the ability to respond without being interrupted by his questioner.
I appreciate that, Congressman. I guess, you know, just a general reflection here, again, that for the last 2 days, members of the intelligence community have been asking questions about a Signal messaging group and not asking questions from Democrats either in the Senate or the House on China, Russia, Iran, and the real threats that are going on to the United States. And you can say that you care about the good work that agencies are doing like the CIA and that you care about 140 stars on the wall, but no one's asked me about my second day on the job here, where I lit the fuse that led to a foreign government participating with us to capture one of the senior planners of the Abbey Gate bombing that killed 13 Americans. And in the process, we worked with a government that previously hadn't, that hadn't cooperated with us on counterterrorism matters. Or the fact no one has focused on that within an hour of that taking place, I was on the phone with Director Patel, and a few hours later with Attorney General Bondi, working together, the IC and the FBI working together to bring this person home in less than a week. Unprecedented success for the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. Exactly representative of the kind of work that we should be doing and the kind of work that an oversight committee should be asking about. But instead, we're getting questions about whether or not someone has drinking habits. And, you know, I just wish in an annual threats hearing where the American people want to hear about threats, that's what we would be talking about. Thanks for the opportunity to clarify.
Absolutely, Director. I want to thank you and all the people who work with you and all the witnesses and the men and women, the brave men and women who are putting their lives on the line each and every day for this country. And to the military as well, we are grateful and we recognize the sacrifice and dedication. Director Ratcliffe, you talked about China being our top national security threat, and I want to go to what really is the most active and persistent threat. It's related to cyber. It's related to the People's Republic of China cyber activities, Volt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, targeting U.S. critical infrastructure, targeting critical infrastructure overseas, compromising U.S. telecommunication companies, and I want to ask Director Gabbard, there are also regular compromises of government networks in the defense intelligence base. The Chinese are acting with impunity in targeting the United States. Clearly, the last administration had no effective deterrent strategy. Considering a whole-of-government approach to leverage legal export control, trade, and other levers, is there more that the U.S. can be doing to deter China's cyber aggression?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. In short, the answer is yes. Much of that relies on our intergovernmental planning and operations, but also very closely integrating with our private sector partners. This is essential for us to be able to harden our own cyber infrastructure, our own critical infrastructure, and to look at what our capabilities, both defensive and offensive, are and how those should be used. If I may, Congressman, I'd just like to address Congressman Gomez's maligning of my reputation and not giving me the opportunity even to respond to his accusations. What occurred in that Signal chat was an update to National Security Cabinet members that was also issued around the same time as updates to our foreign partners and allies in the region. There were no sources, methods, locations, or names of targets that were included in that chat. The decision to conduct this operation had been made long before that conversation took place. I do take my responsibility very seriously and played an integral role in providing the intelligence community's assessments that led to the ultimate decision by the President to conduct an operation, which, by the way, was very successful and continues to be very successful. I was traveling at the time, and I was not playing a very specific role, as these chats reflect, in much of the conversation that took place there. Secretary Hegseth, in my experience, has continued to operate in the way that President Trump's confidence in him inspires, which is in the best interests of the American people and our war fighters and ensuring our national security. I think it's wrong to impugn him, especially at a point where he is not here to defend his own honor. Thank you, Congressman.
I agree with your assessment and support for the Secretary, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you for the time, and I struggle, and if you look at my notes, I've changed my mind about 1,000,000 times what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to first start with Director Radcliffe. I find it offensive for you to accuse me as a Democrat of not caring about national threats. I very much wanted to talk about those, in fact, had prepared questions in advance of this hearing about those threats, specifically about biosecurity and bioterrorism, but I don't have time to ask those questions because the threat is in the House. The threat is across the dais, and I need to ask these questions. It's my job to ask these questions of you. Because when I served in the military, and I served in classified environments, had this happened to me, I would have walked my resignation in immediately. This is not okay. Communicating these sorts of things in Signal is not okay. Targets, times, those kinds of things are absolutely classified, and we all know it. I know it, these people know it, you all know it. And the fact that we're having to have these conversations now means that I can't ask the questions that I need to ask about things like bioterrorism and biosecurity. And so I'd like to put you in check as well, sir, because you can't assume who I am any more than I can assume who you are, sir. I would like to move my questions, however, over to Director Gabbard, because you are the DNI. You do have an obligation and a responsibility. I'm going to speak to you specifically about the fact that you have spent much of your 40 days talking about the importance of making sure that we don't reveal classified information, making sure that we don't leak information. You're a former battalion commander in the Army. I don't think that you would have necessarily appreciated the kind of leaking of information that I believe absolutely did happen in this Signal channel and is worthy of a further investigation. In fact, this committee established something called 50 U.S.C. 3235A, and this committee, on a bipartisan, apartisan basis, requires you, the DNI, to swiftly notify Congress and the Intelligence Committee if you're aware of any sort of significant unauthorized disclosure or compromise of classified information, which I would argue this has all of the markings of being that. And so if you, as the DNI, see such a thing anywhere within your organization's purview, you have the obligation to begin an investigation to report back to us on that. Would this seem to qualify to you as something worthy of that investigation?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. In this situation, Secretary Hegseth has the
Yes or
classification
no?
and
You are the
declassification
DNI.
authority over DOD information.
This chat did not have the auspice of being a DOD chat. There's no such thing as labeling it as DOD. This was a chat amongst a great variety of people, and you, according to our law that we passed here bipartisanly, have an obligation when you think there has been a tangible, significant leak of information to instigate an investigation. Do you not think it's important to do such a thing?
Well, the National Security Council is investigating
no?
this inadvertent leak. And again, I point to Secretary Hegseth as having the classification.
I
and
would argue that
declassification
Secretary
authority.
Hegseth, if he had the dignity that he needs to have, should be walking his resignation in, because I believe that his probably is heading toward being relieved of his duty based on what I think are significant and illegal leaks, most likely. I would like it if you would please commit to this organization that you will follow the law, and I would like it if you would also investigate what is likely to be more than just this chat. Because if there's one, there's more than one. If there's smoke, there's fire. Would you please obligate yourself and your organization to that investigation?
Yeah, Congresswoman, yes, I will follow the law.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Director Patel, I learned just recently that you only heard about this yesterday, which blows my mind since I heard about it 2 days ago, and I'm just a low on the dais, junior chipmunk here. Did you really only hear about this yesterday?
The exact timeline I'm not aware of, but yeah, I think it was yesterday or the night
And now
before.
that another day has passed, do you
Well,
believe...
actually, it was the night before the hearing.
Now that another day has passed, do you believe that it's now time potentially for the FBI to open an investigation into this?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Because you're the director of the FBI, you don't believe it's appropriate to comment on that?
Because there's a process in place, there's an ongoing litigation, and the National Security Council is reviewing this matter. And I'm not going to discuss any open or closed
That
investigations.
ongoing investigation, literally, the lawsuit happened today or yesterday afternoon, and the idea that you don't have an opinion on this at this point is frustrating to me.
No, it's not.
My
I'm not
final
going to
question,
prejudge any
reclaiming my
matters,
time, my
and the men
final
and women of the
question, reclaiming my
FBI will
time, reclaiming
call
my
the
time,
balls and strikes.
Reclaiming my time,
not
sir.
you.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have...
Gentlewoman's recognized. You have
Thank
4
you.
seconds remaining.
No, I have more than
You have
that
2
because
seconds
Mr.
remaining.
Patel would not acknowledge
Gentlewoman's
me.
time has expired. Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, were there any sources described in the signal chat?
No, Congressman.
Were there any methods described in the signal chat?
No.
Were there any locations?
No.
Therefore, due to the fact that there were no sources, no methods, nor locations described in the signal chat, it does not make the discussion classified. Is that correct?
That is up to the Secretary of Defense determination.
The Democrats are obviously making the assertions that what was in the signal chat was classified and claiming that Secretary Hegseth put this war plan out to the world, which he clearly did not. Were there any names in the signal chat?
No.
Any targets?
No.
Any locations?
No.
Was there a unit name or location of that unit?
There was not.
Were there any routes described in the signal chat?
No.
Wouldn't an operational plan contain that type of information?
Every operational plan I've ever seen has contained that information.
Thank you. Shifting to the real threats to America, the southern border. Due to the previous administration's open border policies, they allowed over 10 million illegals into our country. And during that time, there was 1,511 terrorist-related encounters at land border ports of entry, according to CBP. As someone who fought in the war on terror, I find this deeply offensive that the previous administration would sacrifice the security and safety of the American people in the manner in which they allowed terrorists, criminals, and rapists into our country. In your testimony, you state, and I quote, based on the latest reporting available for a year-long period ending October 2024, cartels were largely responsible for the deaths of more than 54,000 U.S. citizens from synthetic opioids. A lot of those citizens are from my home state of Florida. Cartels, narco-terrorists, and other violent transnational criminal organizations have violated the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the United States and have also fueled human trafficking and the opioid epidemic that many of my fellow Floridians have witnessed for far too long. I applaud President Trump and his swift decision to designate the narco-terrorists and Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and I want to thank each of you for making this a priority to fight against Mexican cartels, traffickers, narco-terrorists that have been responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. For every narco-terrorist and cartel member violating our sovereignty, poisoning the American people with fentanyl and other illicit opioids, know this, your days are numbered, and know that the full force of the U.S. government will soon address your atrocities once and for all. Director Patel, it's no secret that there is a growing presence of Mexican cartels operating fentanyl synthesis labs just over our border. Just last year, the CBP estimates that more than 21,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized at our borders. That is enough to kill more than twice the population of the world, of our country. What actions are you taking to strengthen the FBI's fight against illicit fentanyl within our borders?
Thank you, Congressman. It's good to see you. We have made it a priority at the FBI because fentanyl and illegal narcotics kill an American citizen every 7 minutes. That is a national security crisis, not just at the southern border, but at the northern border. And the Mexican cartels, along with their illicit partners in the CCP and other adversarial countries that are doing harm, are not just taking the fight down south, but they're bringing it up north. So we need to be more vigilant as to what's coming in through our northern border as well. Known and suspected terrorists are flowing in through our northern border more than they are our southern border, I would say, because of the successes we've had in closing the southern border. But when it comes to specifically, to fentanyl, we are making, to date, since January 20th, 383 kilograms of seizures of illegal fentanyl, which is enough to kill 29 million Americans.
And other than enhancing border security measures, what would be the most worthwhile action the United States could take to eliminate the cartels and stop the flow of illicit fentanyl?
I got one answer for you. They're making the precursors in mainland China, and we don't have the authorities to go after that fight there, and we need to take it head on. Because without the chemicals and precursors, there is no fentanyl, and they are moving that material around the world and into the United States too freely.
Director Gabbard, I'd like to reemphasize the threat that our adversaries are exploiting via fentanyl and other illicit drugs that are entering our country through the border and poisoning millions of Americans nationwide. It's essential that all components of our national security apparatus are united in their efforts to protect the American people and our communities from such harm. Is there any reason to believe that the Mexican government isn't doing enough to finally eradicate the cartels and other transnational criminal organizations operating just over the border?
Congressman, I can only speak from my vantage point, as was stated previously by Director Ratcliffe. We have already been introduced to and begun collaborating with our counterparts in the Mexican government. Could there be more done? I would say absolutely yes. I know that the Trump administration across his cabinet are looking at opportunities to be able to do that.
And Director Patel just hit on this with CCP and precursors, but to what extent have we seen other malicious actors worldwide partner with the cartels to infiltrate and target the United States?
Related to the
Fentanyl.
production of fentanyl.
Yes, ma'am.
India is one of those countries that is providing some of those precursor materials as well as equipment.
Thank you for being here today. My time's expired.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know it's all us who are worried about this only, but apparently the Senate Armed Services Committee Chair and Ranking Member requested Inspector General report on this chat. So I'll tell you why more people are worried about this than you might think, and that's Director Gabbard, your position was created post 9/11 because of the horrible intel failure that took place there, where we weren't sharing information. It wasn't adequately shared within the community and between our allies. We have to believe that our allies look at this as a colossal mistake and will at least hesitate to a certain extent, wanting to share sensitive information with us that keeps us safe because they're worried about their sources and methods as well. Wouldn't you be at least somewhat concerned that our allies would look at this and say, that wasn't the perfect way to communicate?
Congressman, thank you for the question. If that information that was put out in the chat by the Secretary of Defense had included specific sources and methods and targets and names, then the answer would be yes, but that was not the case.
Let me stop you there because there's such a limited time. Generals, look, you're here because you got tough spots, so I have to put you on the spots. You're passing information like this just within your agency, and you know that it's going to include, we are go for mission launch, Houthis, sea lanes, the information about the weapon systems. That gets to the Houthi military commanders. Doesn't it make you think they're at least going to say duck?
Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on the issue. Yes, if we were collecting this on our adversaries and we're able to get this information as was asked of General Hawk earlier, we would consider that classified, but it's classified under the collection piece. The data that we're talking about here is the operational data, not the intelligence data.
Respectfully, sir, just because we have limited time.
Secretaries.
The Houthis military leader is going to duck when he hears this, or he's going to take some action, or he's going to try to shoot our planes down, right?
If he has actionable intelligence, he will certainly use that.
I'm talking about this intelligence. You don't think he can figure out? Houthis is mentioned a couple times, sea lanes. They show the weapon system. At least it's a credible warning to him.
I would offer the Houthis' defensive position has been constant since the 15th of March.
All right. General, I'll just take a whack at it. You're the Houthis' military leader. You get this information passed on to you, it doesn't make you at least take warning?
I would, Congressman, I think from the Houthis' perspective, they do have air defense equipment, and they would be able to detect aircraft when they're entered into the Red Sea, and certainly when we have our intelligence aircraft operating over top of their country. They'd be able to detect that activity.
But being forewarned is extraordinarily important. I'll take another stab at it. If just language like this, in a different context, okay? But just within your department, sir, your people are passing this information. Do you advise them maybe they don't use Signal on this? Are there other forms? Obviously, they're going to be more secure.
What I would offer is the data that we would be passing would be the full target packages and the full set of operational information.
Okay, but even if it was just this, do you really want to give the possibilities that they could be breached, hacked, and they would get this information? Wouldn't you, even with just this, sir, respectfully, wouldn't you want to use a more secure means of communicating?
I think what I would offer are two things, and hopefully they're helpful to you. One of them would be, in addition to that full package that we would talk about, when the Secretary extracted individual details from that and provided those on signal, whether individually or in aggregate. That is his decision of what is classified and what is not from an operational aspect. And that's probably the most important relevant piece to there. And I would echo what we've said before. It's the Secretary's authority for the
Just give me, there's more secure ways of communicating any of this, right?
There are, and our adversaries have
General,
various
there are,
authorities
right?
to intercept.
There's much more secure means that you use, even if you don't think that this is, or you don't want to stick your
What
head
I
out
would
on
say
it.
is the full packages were transmitted within classified, within traditional classified
But
means.
this could have
All of
been
the ones-
transmitted in a classified way as well. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Arkansas, the distinguished chair of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Hill, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me say, Director Gabbard and Director Radcliffe, it's so great to have you back in the Longworth House Office building. The food's the same, but you're welcome anytime. Director Radcliffe, you know, we've served for 10 years together. I'm certainly aware of your extraordinary service at the DNI and here in Congress. And I just have a couple of follow-up questions on this topic of the Signal chat. Were there any war plans distributed in that Signal chat?
No, Congressman.
And were sources and methods that would compromise our intelligence system or your agents in the field around the world, were they discussed on the Signal chat?
No.
I appreciate that. I just think that's an important thing to have on the record. Director Patel, I co-chair the Americans Wrongfully Detained American Hostage Task Force here in the House, and I just in fact left Tigran Gambaryan, a former FBI official who I helped get out of prison in Nigeria last year. I just left him a few minutes ago. You've you know this issue very, very well, and President Trump's made such a commitment to bring Americans home. There's some 30 Americans still wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad. Is the FBI committing to work through its officials in our embassies around the world to bring those Americans home?
Thank you, Congressman. And as you know from my prior service in the prior administration, President Trump brought home over 50 hostages and detainees worldwide, and that effort is being redoubled now until every single American is home. And the FBI, from my perspective, has been given a directive that any wrongfully detained or captured person overseas is a priority to bring back.
We're so grateful to the President for making this a priority. We don't want our citizens that hold a blue passport to suddenly be a target in all their interactions around the world. That's wrong, and I'm glad President Trump's made it a priority. I look forward to working with you on that. Since November of 2023, I've been pursuing aggressively in this committee the U.S. government's policies and procedures for handling border encounters, specifically known or suspected terrorists. To quote former FBI directors, testimony before the Senate, they're blinking lights everywhere of concern. But despite my numerous attempts, including multiple briefing requests, letters, legislative provisions, a GAO report requested, the prior administration refused to provide requested information and data on what the public now knows was a very dangerous situation along the U.S. borders that President Trump now has as a priority of fixing. In January 2024, there were 176,000 encounters along the southern border, with 51,000 occurring at ports of entry and 124,000 between ports of entry. Comparing that to the work just in the first few weeks of the Trump administration, total encounters are down to 61,000 along the border, with 32 at ports of entry and 29,000 between ports of entry. For the record, that's a 60% reduction. Director Patel, since President Trump took office in January, as we've seen these plummeting border encounter numbers, has the country seen a drop in known or suspected terrorist encounters at the border?
Thank you, Congressman. It's one of the issues I really wanted to address today. And I think the country deserves to know that known or suspected terrorists, KSTs, are coming in with much less frequency at the southern border. In fact, if my information is correct, 2 since January 20th. And they are coming in with much greater frequency in the northern border, and since January 20th, that number is 34. And those metrics carry out over the last year in terms of ratio. So what it tells me is that known or suspected terrorists, the individuals that want to do the most harm to this country, are utilizing the northern border, and we got to refocus assets up there.
Yeah, which I think is good. And I'm glad the prior administration did declassify the ISIS arrests in Philadelphia and did declassify the a citizen that was coming across the northern border to do harm on Election Day. That's good, but we have much more to do. And Director Gabbard, I need your help working with your colleagues here. It's this idea of requesting coordination between Director Patel, Secretary Noem, and the committee with fused data on known or suspected terrorists. Whether it's TSA data, BPP data, FBI internal data, we want to have that coming to us. Where are these people? What's been done with them? What is the government's position on them? Will you commit to work with us as OD&I to get this information from across the government, IC?
Absolutely, Congressman. And as you know, our National Counterterrorism Center was really created to fulfill exactly that task, so that we're not dealing with multiple vetting systems that are coming up with different results, that we have this central vetting database to be able to identify those known or suspected terrorists who may be trying to come into our country, or who may be one of the tens of millions who illegally crossed into our border, may have come into our country during the last 4 years.
We look forward to working with you. Thank you for your answers, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Tinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to all of you. There's so many great questions that I have to ask, but I want to start with Director Patel, and I just want to first, before I get into a couple issues, thank you so much for your outstanding service and your recognition and focus on the northern border. My entire district is the northern border of New York with Canada. I just want to first jump into this issue for, Hamas attacked October 7th. The world watched in horror. Designated a foreign terrorist organization in 1997, killed over 1,200 civilians, and including American citizens, and many remain hostages. Only slightly less disturbing, we had a myriad of seemingly coordinated pro-Hamas demonstrations that have taken place all over the United States, in my state of New York, on college campuses, in Washington, D.C., universities. Director Patel, does the FBI have any open investigations into the organization, the leadership, and the funding of these pro-Hamas demonstrations with students such as, and groups such as Students for Justice in Palestine?
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm limited by what the Attorney General has already publicized, but as you know, there are open investigations based on what's been made public.
Okay. Has the FBI uncovered any evidence of foreign support for these Hamas demonstrations, including, other than Iran, any of these groups I might mention, like Students for Justice in Palestine, anything that's open source that we can talk about?
That's still ongoing.
Thank you. Director Gabbard, thank you so much for your service. It was great to serve with you in Congress as well, and work so much on wonderful veterans issues. My son's also a Marine major, and so we appreciate the service of everybody here. Let's keep in mind, obviously we're in open session. Do you have anything or ongoing intelligence to suggest there's foreign support from governments, non-government groups, and individuals that have helped these pro-Hamas demonstrations all across America, including on university campuses?
Congresswoman, there are some assessments that reflect that, and we can talk about that in the closed session.
Great, thank you so much. And now I want to get back to Cash, Director. Great work on the northern border. I'm one of the co-founders of the Northern Border Security Caucus, and your information has been tremendous. Once I got the district that I represent now, this sprawling, long district, the entire northern border is Canada. And as you say, 358 suspects on the terror watch list. Almost 90% of the suspects on the terror watch list are coming across our northern border. I'd love to talk to you. What is the FBI doing specifically dealing with this northern border? And what access point are you, who are you working with? Is there a way that we have got a way to handle this with the foreign terror threats? And I say this in light of my district specifically, where New York State, led by Democrats, by the way, is notorious for their unwillingness to work with law enforcement. Under Governor Cuomo, we cut off the ability. I know Congressman Quigley talked about working together after 9/11. The state hit hardest by 9/11. And Governor Cuomo put in a law that prohibited law enforcement from working together in 2019. What are we doing so we can work with New York, the government and others, to make sure that this doesn't happen across our New York northern border?
Well, one, and this is out of my lane, but what we need to be doing is working with the Canadian government because they sit on top of our northern border. We do have the problem of tyranny of distance and sheer geography as compared to the southern border, but when we were told that the Mexican government would not work with us, we overcame that hurdle, and we've seen the immediate results, as I highlighted to your colleague, about northern border contacts with KSTs versus the southern border. The other thing we can be doing is working across every northern border state who has a geographic border with Canada and their local and state affiliates, which we are doing at the FBI, but it is such a vast enterprise that we would need a huge increase in resources to cover down on that the way we do in Mexico.
In addition, thank you for that. In addition with working with the Canadians, are you also working with the New York State government? Because we do have a number of interesting assets, a sprawling Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation that kind of goes across the northern border with New York and Canada, or those types of things, ways that you can work with the New York government and also in coordination with the Canadian Royal Police.
Absolutely, ma'am, and you highlight a great point. A lot of the northern border touches upon tribal lands, and we need to work with tribal leaders throughout the country as effectively as we do with state and local governments, and at the FBI, we're doing just that.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate all of your service, and I yield my time back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Director Patel, many of us had grown, increasingly alarmed at the sheer number of foreign nationals we're seeing caught spying on our critical infrastructure or, near sensitive sites in the country. One example is a Chinese national who's flying a drone, allegedly flying a drone over Vandenberg and taking pictures of the base. He was arrested in the San Francisco airport not that long after. Director Patel, would you agree that the two most dangerous nation states to our homeland and our interests are China and Russia?
Yes, Congressman.
So it would stand to reason that we should pay particular attention when foreign nationals from these two countries, who we've already established are the greatest threats to our country now and in the future, when they try to sneak into our country illegally.
Absolutely, sir.
Can you speak on the illegal migration we see from Russia and China and the differences that we saw from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration?
Well, one, the problem you have when you have an effective resolution to that set of issues is that the enemy adapts. And what they've done is utilize, as we were just discussing with your colleague, the northern border to shift their resources and affiliations to pour in known or suspected terrorists through the northern border. They haven't stopped through the southern border. They just know that we are setting up a pretty monumental effort down there to stop any known or suspected terrorists from entering the country. But the thing is, the Chinese, the Russians, Iranians, and other adversaries are utilizing their partners, just like they are doing in terms of how they move illicit fentanyl precursors into this country. They're moving humans in the same fashion, and we need to treat it as such.
Did you see an increase from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration on Russian and Chinese nationals crossing the border? Did it increase or decrease?
Yes, actually, so the PRC nationals crossing the southern border from 22 to 25 was 178,000. And I don't have the number for the northern border, sir, but I'll get that to you.
So, what we found was that there was actually a market increase, alarming, with the Chinese illegal migration increasing 527% all in, and Russian 2,400%. And if just 1/10 of 1%, some fraction, some tiny fraction, 1/10 of 1% are actually asset sleeper agents loyal to Moscow or Beijing, they could wreak havoc and mayhem in a free and open society. It's very dangerous. And then those are the ones we know about. What about the ones that snuck across and we never found them? The unknown gotaways, if you will. So, Director Patel, there's also great concern about the increasing number of counterintelligence threats that are penetrating all levels and branches of government, both local, state, and federal. The number of elected and appointed officials willing to betray this country is becoming increasingly pervasive. Last year, we saw a former senior aide in the New York governor's office, Linda Sun, and her husband, Chris Hu, indicted on charges of money laundering and acting as foreign agents to the People's Republic of China. Ms. Sun used her position to block Taiwanese representatives from access to New York State officials. Instead, we're rolling out the red carpet for those PRC officials to have those meetings. I mean, that's some scary stuff. So when we have someone like Sumi Terry, who also worked covertly spying on Korea while working simultaneously with various think tanks, and she had been national security official, and she'd worked for the CIA and the National Security Council. And because of her job, members of Congress and their staffs had access to these Korean intelligence officials, and she was paid with, thousands of dollars in luxury gifts. But Director Patel, I get that these investigations are ongoing and sensitive. But to the extent that you can, could you please briefly highlight the security the severity rather, of these counterintelligence threats, including a rough estimate of the number of open counterintelligence cases that are pending?
We have many, and I'll get you the exact number, sir, in closed session. But what it highlights is that the enemy is not relenting. They're actually doubling down and tripling down on their efforts, and there's no sector in government that they won't go to and try to infiltrate and penetrate access and turn people in this country against our own nation. So that is a national security threat of our time, as is the terrorism threat and as is the fentanyl threat. It needs to be treated as such equally, and at the FBI we're doing that.
Thank you. And Director Patel, will you commit to providing this committee with classified briefing on the severity, the FBI processes and procedures, including defensive briefings related to counterintelligence threats involving elected and or appointed officials?
For defensive briefings, Congressman, I commit to you that the FBI will give you everything we have in our holdings. I can't comment on other people's.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, particularly Mr. John Ratcliffe, Congressional District 4 as well. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I just got notice that the baseball shooting report discussed by Vice Chairman Kelly earlier today has been delivered to our SCIF, and I appreciate, Director Patel, your responsiveness to that issue. Thank you so much for your commitment and the appropriate transparency demonstrated in that. We appreciate that very much. Since each member has had an opportunity to question our witnesses, I will now close this portion of the hearing, and we'll reconvene in closed session at 2 p.m. in the HIPSI spaces. I ask the public and staff to please remain seated until our witnesses depart. Thank you.